So welcome to a presentation and demonstration on HP's database and middleware automation. We're going to use the word DMA a lot so that I don't have to say database and middleware automation throughout the presentation. They're interchangeable. HP had purchased DMA from a company called StrataVia. StrataVia found a spot in the world where people weren't paying too much attention to, and that was taking care of platforms. Platforms being defined as a database or a middleware piece, something like a WebLogic server, WebSphere server, JBoss. What DMA does is it handles the lifecycle of those applications. Not just, here's your setup.exe, go and run it. It will provision a production-ready system, put it under management, run patches against it, run compliance checks against it, add and remove databases, etc., etc. So what we're looking at here is everything that HP has pretty much has a dashboard associated with it so you can see what's going on, what things get used the most, what's the most popular kinds of applications within that tool. The tool is built around a function with its own orchestrator. So we orchestrate commands to these servers. And the orchestration really runs in what we have as steps. A step, if you imagine a usual DBA is going to have their scripts. They write their scripts to do specific things. Over time, they end up being several hundred lines long, very hard to edit and keep up to date. What HP's done, or StrataVia, and the reason why HP bought them, was they took those scripts and took them down into just little chunklets of those scripts. So what we're looking at here is literally a script that all it does is it adds an instance to a rack node. Right? So we have an Oracle rack instance. There's a couple of servers running an Oracle database, and we say, go add me an instance to it. And this is just that little piece of scripting. Why is that important? Well, we then take that and we orchestrate through workflows. Right, we take the steps and we organize them. And we can sit here and play, and take a look at taking a look at a patch to a database, for example, or apply a patch to a rack instance. And what they do is they take that step that I just described and showed and put it in a logical flow, right? Rather than just saying, go patch the server, let's do some things beforehand. Let's make sure the server is ready for the patch. Maybe quiesce the database, shut it down. We can run a backup of the database. We pull down the software. We move the Oracle home so that we're not patching live data. And then we make sure the patch info is accurate, etc. But what we're looking at here is a flow or an orchestration of what can happen for just patching an Oracle database. Same thing for SQL, WebLogic, and the other middleware applications. And it's depicted here in two different ways, right? There's a visual for those people that are used to like a Visio look and feel, ordering it, and then you can see graphically what's going to happen, right? Step 1 through step 17, and then we're good. Down below are the actual options and variables that we can set. So anything that has a little blue arrow next to it, we can expand and take a look at the things that we can set within this workflow. We can set variables, options. We can hard set maybe some options if we always want to use the same database name, the same patch name, for example. So everything that's got these blue arrows, we can expand and take a look at and either expose them so that we can modify as we run this workflow to work on different versions of Oracle, maybe on a development space, and then production space, testers. They run things differently. So we sit here and we take a look at this and just make sure that these options can be set. Now we've shown the steps, which are the little pieces and parts that make up that workflow. And what we do in a lot of cases then is we'll set up what we call a policy. A policy just feeds in those variables, right? But if you think about it, your SMEs or your DBAs, if they're going to take the time to set the system up, why don't we set it up such that they don't have to do the redundant task constantly. They can put the information in once, and it can be used by anybody. But we know that the information is correct because the DBAs have set up that information, right? So we're looking at here, it would be a policy for setting up an Oracle system. What account is it going to be built under? Where am I putting, the Oracle home? What software am I going to use to build this server? And where am I putting the data file location? So my DBAs go and they put that information in, and we can take and say who has access to read and execute, or maybe update that information that was put in there. So my DBAs go in this case we'll call them the admins, and they say, you know what, yeah, these guys, they don't need access to change it. These individuals, these individuals, these individuals, and these, they can read it, but they can never make changes to it. And we go ahead and say, let's update the information. We're good there. We also have the ability to take a look at where that information is used so that we can see what will be affected if we make changes to the system, right? So we go and take a look at it is used within building these servers. And if we look at the parameters, we can see that, yep, here we go. There's that policy name that we were just looking at. And then this side of the information is what option or what variable within that policy am I going to use. So we have, what's the data file location? Well, it's in this policy, and within that policy, this is where you can find it. So we can go back and take a look at data file location in this policy. What did somebody put in there? So we have Oracle provisioning, Oracle data file locations right here, and this is the information that's going to get passed into the workflow. Right? So instead of it being Oracle data file location, we're actually going to build the server with this information here. Policies can get pretty detailed. We can take and do authentication systems, and if we do an authentication, we'll mask off the passwords. Right? So let's say I'm in, want to build a JBoss server, and I don't want people to know what the password is, or the admin password is for the JBoss server if they have access to read this. Remember, we can read and write to these policies. And in this case, it's only the administrators that have access to it and the super users of the system. Well, within those two groups, maybe I don't want the super users to be able to see what the password is. It's okay, because we mask it off. And in this case, by the way, this password is 8 characters long, and you'll notice it gets hashed into 3 dots on the screen. It then gets encrypted into a storage on the database for database middleware automation, so it gets encrypted in as well. So it gets masked off, and it's encrypted into the system. In this case, this one is used in building a server called Red Hat Standalone, and we have the password here, which is masked off. Okay, so how does and why does DMA do this? Well, we put servers under management, and we go through and we take a look at information about what's on those servers. So I have an environment that I've told DMA about, and we go in and we say, okay, here's a server that DMA knows about. In this case, on this Oracle.test, since it was a test server in the lab, I actually put in WebLogic on the server. So we can see that the WebLogic cluster is called demo, and these servers exist within that system. So there's an admin server. WebLogic always requires an admin and management console that exists on this physical box. And there's a managed server called WLS1, and it always builds a server with the real DNS name. Cool thing is now we can take, as I showed you in the dashboard, we have a group of servers, right? Okay, there's a server called CMDB and JBoss and Test SQL and WAS Test, et cetera, et cetera. We can get even deeper within there and show of those, I have Linux servers, right? I have a SQL server. I have Oracle servers, meaning that I have Oracle installed, and there's an RDMS that will have Oracle. There's an RDMS or instance that contains SQL. Why would that be important? Because within the system, things run at both the server level and or the instance level. If I'm going to patch a SQL instance, for example, let's see what we have here for patching. If I'm going to install a SQL patch, it's going to want to go after an instance, not a server name. So you'll notice here I have SQL servers defined as the appropriate place to go, rather than server name SQL123.poc.local or hp.com or whatever. It will only work on existing servers that are running SQL. That's great. The way we do that is we come back to the environment, and I'll set up something that goes and peels out and says, okay, show me only the servers that are running SQL. Show me only the servers that are running Oracle. And if we go back to what I was just looking at, right? Install a patch, right? So here we have these. If I were to click Run, I would only get a list of servers that are running SQL. They're the only valid ones to run this workflow against, so I don't have a very busy screen, and I have to know what's running what, where things exist. And so in this case, I could install SQL 2008 R2 Service Pack 1 on a server. If I want to install a standalone instance, in other words, install an instance of SQL, I'd go to another level and say, you know what? These are the servers, virtual, physical, doesn't matter, that are valid for me to install SQL on. Well, what about Oracle? There's a different list of servers. These guys are running Linux in this case. So since I'm going to be running Oracle on my Linux boxes, yes, we can run Oracle on Windows, and the system will do it, but for demonstration purposes, Linux is pretty much where you're going to see, Oracle running. Solaris, you see it running on. For demo, I run them on Linux all the time. So these are the valid Linux hosts the system knows about that I can run Oracle on. I can go even deeper and do some things and set up an attribute that says, go out there and find the servers that have a particular directory structure. And those are the ones that are only available for Oracle, as an example. So the concept of DMA, I have steps, which are basically just little pieces of code, right? Just a little scriptlet. It's a chunklet of code. I like to use that word. It's a chunk of code, and in a lot of cases it's a sub-chunk if I'm downloading a file. But they also allow me to use them over and over. So instead of having a giant script that only does one thing, I have little pieces that I can use in different workflows. And again, the workflows is just a logical ordering of those steps. So as an example here, we see download software. That is used in so many different workflows, and it's just one script. I don't have to have the same code existent in every script I run to do things. Check to see if the file that I'm defining, to pull down and do my installation with exists, is used probably in 100 workflows. So out of the box, right, these are the kinds of things we get. There's hundreds of workflows out of the box. And, if you think about it, excuse me, from a standpoint of HP as a provider, we don't know exactly what each and every company in the world is going to do once the server's built, or maybe what they do to prepare that server to be built. This system is designed to provision, to patch, to do configuration management, to run compliance checks, maybe do release management. Adding users or groups of users isn't something that is considered part of provisioning. That's like a post-provisioning step, right? I built the server. Now let me add users that are allowed to access the server. Well, if you happen to have a script or a piece of script that can do that, we can just bring it right into the system. So we can build the server and then tack on a little step that says go add user group WAS users or Oracle users, just by coming in and having a literal plain text editor that I can copy and paste my code. The system's capable of using bash scripts, corn shell scripts. We can run, Windows batch files, but it'll also do Perl, Python, Jython, all the interpretive languages, as long as that interpreter exists on the server I'm going to run the script on. So there's really no end to what this can do, right? So we have all these steps that do things. We put them into logical flows. We assign attributes that can be used to build systems, patch systems, define the configuration of systems that are set up by the SMEs, the subject matter experts, such that now operators can run it, or the guy that's on staff at 2 in the morning during your maintenance window can run these things, and the DBAs only get paged or called if there's an error. They don't have to be down at the site or up at their computer logged in at 2 in the morning. It can just be part of their regular operating procedure now that they've set it up, they know it works, and now operations staff can run it. It can also be tied into other automation things. So if I build a server using an automation package, server automation, for example, or our cloud system, I can make this middleware piece a part of that server build. So I lay down my operating system. I'll set up a Linux system or a Solaris system or a Windows system. And then the next thing I do is I call DMA and say, now put this platform on top of that infrastructure. So we can get you to platform as a service very, very quickly, and a production-ready platform as a service. So I can build a platform for my developers. They can go and develop things, and my server admins don't have to be involved to build that server. My DBAs or my application admins don't have to be involved to put the database or the web servers down. All it is they just run an automation process, and they receive a system ready for them to start developing on. Same thing for testing and production. I can build a production version of a WebLogic server just by feeding a little bit maybe different information in here, right? Maybe on my production system I don't have demo, or I don't have this entire path right here. I'll have a different path for my production system. I'll have a different cluster name for my production system. That's fine. We'd have a policy called production provision WebLogic software and have different information inside here. A lot of the things may be the same, right? Maybe I'm going to use the exact same binary installation. And by the way, with WebLogic in particular, there's 2 different methods that we can build the server. There's the native, which is the .bin file you see here. It's a native installer. Or there's a Java installer that we would feed a jar file to, and it goes and builds a system that way. Doesn't matter which way you want to do it. If you're doing the Java one, you have to let it know where your Java home is, and lo and behold, we can put that into a policy as well and feed it in. So maybe in my development systems, Java's in one place, production it's another. Again, I just set that up in a policy, and inside we call it a deployment, but you can call it a build, right? All we do is we put the information in the right location and reference it. So in that particular case, right, I would put Java Home here, and it would be demo Java Home or production Java Home, and it would reference the proper policy and set the system up the way you want to. So we can run some things and get them up and going. Let me turn on a server so that we can run some of these systems and show you how DMA works. So again, in this environment, there's a couple of servers I just turned on. It's the JBoss server, Oracle, and the SQL test. And you'll notice there's already some things installed on there because they're here for demonstration purposes. So in this case, this one's running WebSphere and SQL 2012. This one is running WebSphere version 7. And this guy up here is running was running JBoss, and this one is running WebLogic. So we'll throw something else at them to show what happens. It does take a little bit of time, but I can show you the process with which things happen. So let's make sure I'm going after the right ones. Okay, so that guy. So I'm going to run some of this automation just to show, what can happen, right? So let's go build an Oracle server, and I'm going to tell it to be built on that JBoss named server. And if you notice, all the parameters that I'm feeding into it are right here on the screen with me. So there's an Oracle account existent on the server. This is where I'm going to make my Oracle base. My Oracle home is going to go here. These are the binary installation media that I'm going to use. Some of the other parameters. What version am I installing? Enterprise Edition. It is not going to be a rack install. And because I'm doing a demo, I'm just saying, some of the system requirements, if they're iffy, just go ahead and ignore them and continue on. And pretty much everything else, there's no parameters. I'm taking all the defaults. But we can expose some parameters and set values in them. Parse Oracle inventory, I can tell it where to find the Aura inst file. I can tell it, make sure that the download file exists. Here's the name. I can do all these things. Or tell this step right here to go ahead and use the information that was given to us up here. And I can pass variables down through the orchestration in that case. Okay, so let's go run this thing. And there is a console that lets us know what's going on. And we can take it from there. So it's running. And we'll go back and take a look at some other information in here. We'll take a look maybe at some history of things that happened. Let's take a look at a WebLogic server to give you the kinds of information that you can take a look at as it's running. So information given to you, I have debug mode turned on so that everything gets displayed so people can see the information that they can glean, and it can be copied out into a log file system or a syslog system so you can have records of it. One of my customers wanted to have all the information put into a help desk ticket. So as somebody requested a server, it would open the ticket, put all the information about that server into the ticket, and then close it. And that was their system of record. They had everything that happened to that server as it was built in a system of record they could refer to later. So, this step here is literally just give me some information about the server. I'm going to build a managed server. So I already have the software has been installed. I have the management piece installed, and now I'm putting a managed server that is actually your WebLogic, web system. So it validates all the information. It validates the parameters, making sure, that I don't have an ampersand where there's supposed to be a colon, for example. The ports that I'm going to use are valid for the system. So this system here in particular, I'd connect to it on this port to do something, make sure that it's not already used on the server. Am I going to, turn on certificates? Am I going to turn on SSL? In that case, needing to have a certificate. DMA will allow you to do self-signed certificates, which is pretty important if you think about it. If you're building a system from an automation package, your certificate may not exist yet. So you can sign it yourself, be your own signing authority for development and testing. And then when you move it into production, you make sure that a certificate exists at your true certificate authority. And we go and we provision the box, all the information that we used sitting right here in front of us, right? So the admin server name, what are we going to call it? Administration port that I defined. Other information like this is the version of the software. Are we enabling the console, et cetera, et cetera. All the options that you can feed into building a box, right? And then they stop the admin server. They start the admin server because it has just been added into the system now for management. Right? Another example maybe would be a WebSphere. This is the kind of information that we can pull out for WebSphere, make sure that it passed the tests. Is there enough disk space? Is there enough memory? If there's not, why go any further? because it'll fail, right? So we do all these things, check to make sure the server can accept what I'm trying to do to it, and then go and do the installation, set up all the options that I put in there, and now I have another kind of web server available to me. So again, it's JBoss, WebLogic, WebSphere. If there's any errors, I can take a look real quick into the history or the console and make sure that the errors are clean. We're using standard Linux result codes, right? So a 0 is obviously going to be successful. A 1 is a failure. 255 around at this space, things like that are going to be the result codes that come out of here. 0 is always good. And green in DMA is always good as well. And you'll notice, yes, I have some failures in here. This is my demo system, so I expect that I'm going to make mistakes as I set things up. So I talked a lot about the different things. Database, WebLogic, WebSphere, JBoss. How does this work? How do I get a hold of it? There is literally just two things or two line items that HP has for DMA. There's a database piece, and the database piece includes database provisioning, database patching, database compliance, database provisioning, and there's also extended or what I call complex. Right, there's one provisioning solution for standard databases. There's another one for rack systems or clustered systems. So, but even still, all that comes if you want the database piece. Another line item is going to be your application systems, application servers, like your WebLogic, WebSphere, JBoss, etc. Right, so between those, it's two line items or both. If you just want to do databases, you get the database packs. If you want to do application servers, you get the application packs, or both, and then you can do everything. So what does that mean? Well, I have an advanced database provisioning pack, and I have a standard database provisioning pack. They're both going to come with it. They used to separate them out, but it's much easier to say, you know what, you're going to do database, applications, here's the entire thing you might need, because you can grow now into the system. You can start off doing some simple things like patching, as an example. A lot of customers start with patching their databases. A lot of Oracle customers are months and months behind in their patching because it becomes very difficult to do. There's a solution pack that contains lots of workflows to do the patching in a, again, logical manner. And we can do patching either live or inline or take it offline. In other words, copy the home, move the home area. In SQL, we would move the instance, make a copy of it, patch the copy, do some testing, and then repoint the home to that. You still have your original home data, the home pointers, if you need to roll back. So we can roll back patches as well. In Microsoft's case, if the patch registers into the system, so if it shows up in the add remove programs, we can roll it back out. If all it's done is gone into the registry and made a couple of changes, we don't, because Microsoft doesn't. They don't allow it. Anything the vendor allows, we'll do. Okay, so all the installed solution packs are here. There is a compliance pack for databases. So what does that mean? That means, you know what? It's interesting that in the old days we had, SOX compliance, Sarbanes-Oxley, PCI compliance, HIPAA for healthcare. Well, that was pretty much on the infrastructure level or the server. Have I protected the server? Do I have the firewall turned on? Have I renamed the guest account or disabled it? Have I renamed the administrative account? Just as examples. For a database, what they have is there's an information called Center for Internet Security that went and looked at options to be set on databases so that we make sure they're secure. Same kind of thing we're looking at the infrastructure level, right? So we have actual compliance audits for Oracle, SQL, and Sybase, and there's actual reports that we can run for the different systems. What it'll do is it'll take and run everything against the Center for Internet Security, and then based upon that, there is no real definition for PCI and no real definition for SOX. What HP's done is said, based upon what PCI has done for the infrastructure, this would make sense that they would do to databases if they had a definition. So it runs against CenterNet for Internet Security, and those are hard, fast configuration items, and then it projects into PCI and SOX to see if they would be compliant if they ever release true compliance for them. Okay, we can email to whomever, if you have a group account or you have a DBA kind of person that you want to receive, the compliance reports, or there's a database manager. Let them receive the reports, schedule them to run every Saturday night. They show up Monday morning. They have a view sitting right in front of them graphically how their databases look from a compliance standpoint. If there's errors in some building or patching, you can put the mail step or send the email to somebody right inside that workflow so that you're notified if there's an issue, rather than sitting here and watching the screen go. Okay? You set up the roles on the system, and those roles you saw when I was going through who has access to do what, who can read or write to different things, and we can add and remove them from this screen here and define what they are. Right? So if I go up to DMA admins, I can remove them, which would be a bad thing in this case. So let's take these guys out. And let's take these guys out. Right? So now there's 2 less groups that can even log into the system. So OS deployers, what that would mean is people that build the systems. Your server administrators would build your Windows server, but they don't need to get into the system, so let's make sure they can't. Their IDs were just removed. Even though you have LDAP set up or Active Directory set up with accounts for those people, that container is no longer valid on this server, so they can't log into the server and change anything. They can't see anything. Right? So let's take a look at the capabilities, and this is where we are. Okay? I can come in and say, let's see, compliance policy setters. They tell me what to set up, but they don't need to log in and run the things. Or they don't need to create logical flows or logical steps of what's going to happen, and we can go through and set all that stuff up, right? So there we are. Let's go back to the environment and see what's going on with our JBoss system. Okay, so I have the software down that we started with for Oracle. Now, that's not an Oracle database. If you remember the way that Oracle does everything, you lay down the software first, it kind of sets up the environment, and then you execute against it. So we have Oracle software laid down. Let's go build us a database on that box, and we'll call it Demo Talk. Unfortunately, this is a 45-minute process. I don't know that we're going to just sit here and wait for it, but you'll see that I have those 2 steps. If I want to go into a cloud situation or an automation situation, all I do is say run those 2 steps consecutively. So build the server, lay down the Oracle software, provision the Oracle database. All said and done, that automation process is done. I have a production-ready database. It has a name. It's an instance. It has accounts associated with it to run. The only thing it doesn't have is table structures. That happens when you come in and you add your application to it. But we're going in and we're preparing the Oracle instance, and the next thing we're going to see is it's going to create the database, run the command to do that, put it under management, and I'll be going, we'll go from there. Right? So we're going to run the DBCA command, which will create the database, put it on a particular listener port. In this case, it's Oracle Standard. Not recommended for production, but again, this is a demo system. And it'll have an Oracle system down here very shortly. So if there's any questions, you'll be able to contact me for a in-person demo or a live demo. You want to actually see this thing get installed at your location, feel free to contact us, and we'll be able to help you out.